Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and back again in a hotel room. I'm again traveling. This time I'm actually in Oklahoma City to see a couple of Thunder games, which is super exciting for me. Live on the East Coast, so I don't often get to see the Thunder play, but I got to see them beat the Blazers by 62 last night, which was very nice. But you know me, still want to get you some content even when I'm on the road, so brought my equipment with me so I can make these videos. And today, I want to talk for a bit about the Memphis Grizzlies, who are in a very weird spot at the moment. For the past couple of years, the Grizzlies have consistently been one of the best teams in the Western Conference. Really, ever since I think it was Ja Morant's second season, they have been a force. They made that play-in run that year, then afterwards, they made it to the second round to lose to the Warriors, and last year, it felt like they could culminate on all of that and maybe make a sneaky run to the Western Conference Finals. They're led by Ja Morant, who is rising to an all-star, all-NBA level. You had Jaren Jackson Jr., who was making a depoy campaign and had started to establish himself as a high-level offensive player as well, becoming an all-star after missing a substantial portion of the beginning of the season. That's just how impactful he was. Desmond Bane was taking another leap after he maybe should have won MIP the season before, becoming a fringe all-star type player for that team. A number of role players were stepping up. They had some great depth. This Grizzlies team felt like one of the scarier forces in the Western Conference, and it had them up there as a top 3 seed for pretty much the entire season. However, towards the beginning of the 2023 calendar year, things really started to implode for the Memphis Grizzlies. And since that point, it's just been a constant downhill struggle for the Grizzlies, a team that felt like they were going to be dominating the Western Conference for a long time, and they probably still can, but at the very least, it's not going to happen this season. So let's talk about what's gone wrong. It started off last winter with Steven Adams getting injured. He ends up hurting his knee in, I believe it was January, and it was an injury that didn't seem like it was going to keep him out for that long, definitely for like a month or so, maybe a couple of months, but it felt like he would at the very least be back by the playoffs. Brandon Clark then in March tore his Achilles, another big blow to their front court depth. And I don't think enough people realize how good and impactful Brandon Clark is, especially for this Grizzlies team. With Adams out, they needed a guy to provide some energy, some screening, some lob catching ability, just some physicality for this team. And Brandon Clark was one of those guys, a high-level energy guy off the bench, that now losing him for probably an entire calendar year was going to decimate this Grizzlies front court. With him and Adams out, they were in a lot of trouble going down the stretch of the season, and it was made even worse when it was announced that Adams wasn't going to be back for the playoffs, and they were going to have to face the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round, a team that loves to get downhill and attack the basket. They've never been great as a three-point shooting team, but they've got AD and LeBron James, two of the league's premier paint attackers. They just had no answers. They really couldn't do anything to slow them down, and so they eventually lose the series pretty comfortably. Lakers go on to make a Western Conference Finals run, one that maybe the Grizzlies could have been on instead if they just could have kept guys on the court. But that's only the beginning, because things have somehow gotten even worse since those playoffs. It began with the Ja Morant suspension. It was announced that he would be suspended for 25 games, leaving the Grizzlies without their superstar talent in Ja Morant, who would so often carry them despite injuries. And the Grizzlies, up until this point, had been able to stay afloat in a lot of games even when Ja wasn't playing, but that was when they had a lot more depth than they have now, especially because they were a relatively healthy team. Now, Brandon Clark was going to miss at least the first few months of the season, and it was announced that Steven Adams was going to undergo season-ending surgery before the year even began. So their front court is decimated. They're now without their superstar top-end talent. Oh, and also, the Western Conference was more stacked than it's been in a really long time. Before the season, even before the Grizzlies were dealing with all this extra stuff, I didn't know who was going to end up where in the playoffs. It felt like there were 11, 12 teams that could theoretically at least make it into the play-in, if not make it into the playoffs themselves. A number of teams that felt like they could make deep runs in the Western Conference, a lot of young teams on the rise. And I felt like the Grizzlies were supposed to be one of those teams, but with these big injuries, it started to become a question of, can they stay afloat enough in those first 25 games to actually make it into the playoffs? They did still have Marcus Smart, who they brought into the fold to bring them a little bit of toughness and defensive physicality in the loss of Dillon Brooks. They still had Desmond Bane, who was really good, and it felt like he could have an all-star start to the season with more shots. They had Jaren Jackson Jr., the reigning depoy, and a guy who had shown an ability to take over when they need him to. They still had talent, don't get me wrong, and it felt like all they had to do was stay afloat at least a little bit until Ja came back, and they could potentially still make it in as a play-in team, and a team that would be really tough to knock out in the first round. It didn't go great without Ja Morant. I believe they started off like 1 of 9, 2 of 8 or something like that. They were 6-19 when Ja Morant came back, which is definitely not a good record, but it wasn't that far behind some of the other teams in the Western Conference, and it felt like all they had to do was get Ja back, try and get the team healthy, and maybe they could still make a bit of a run to the play-in. And in the first game, Ja came back. They looked really good. Easily their best game of the season up to that point. Ja came back with a vengeance against the Pelicans with 34 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, and 2 steals on 50% shooting, including a game winner versus the Pelicans. a big statement that announced that, hey, Ja Morant is back and the Grizzlies aren't quite dead yet. They won their next 3 games too and ended up going 6-3 over Ja Morant's first 9 games, a massive improvement from the first 25 of the season, up until January 7th when he was dealing with some shoulder soreness and sat out twice, once versus the Suns and one versus the Mavericks, but both games that they managed to win. So since Ja Morant's return, they had gone 8-3 and they'd put themselves less than 5 games back of the 10 seed with a lot of basketball left to be played and a Brandon Clark return potentially looming right around the All-Star break. There was also the trade deadline to make some moves to fix this team up. They were getting some improved play from some of their young guys like a Vince Williams, for example. And hey, it seemed like the Grizzlies might actually be able to make this thing happen despite all the injuries to their frontcourt guys, the Ja Morant suspension, injuries to guys like Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard who had missed time amongst a billion others. This team had been battered, but they still weren't out of it yet. However, just a few days later and their season is practically over. Just a few days ago, the literal worst case scenario happened in Memphis where they've dealt with injury after injury after injury after suspension. Everything has gone wrong for them that possibly could over the last year or so, but the one thing they could not afford, the one thing they couldn't have happen if they wanted to keep the season alive was Ja Morant dealing with a significant injury, especially one that would cause him to miss the rest of the season. You know what? That shoulder soreness he was dealing with, turns out it's a torn labrum. Ja Morant is going to miss the rest of the season with a season-ending surgery. It's devastating because Ja was playing really well when he came back. It was so much fun to watch him. The Grizzlies were going to be this amazing storyline all season where it's like, can they overcome the odds? All the stuff that has been put against them at the beginning of the season, can they come back? Can they make it to the play? And maybe they make an acquisition around the deadline. And suddenly they're a team that nobody wants to face if we're one of those top seeds. Coming out of the play-in tournament, they felt like they could make some real noise as a play-in team, but now the season is all but over. The good news is that a torn labrum isn't really an injury that should prevent Ja from playing well next season. It shouldn't prevent him from starting next season at all, I believe. He should be perfectly good to go. He's still going to be playing at his high level, but it certainly puts a nail in the coffin for this year. He was playing great. The Grizzlies had figured it out. It just really sucks. And to add insult to injury, yesterday Marcus Smart was announced to have hurt his finger and is now going to be at 6 weeks of his own. Just nobody on the Grizzlies can stay on the court this season. It's a cursed year. It's been a cursed past 10, 11 months for this team. A team that felt like, again, they could make a deep playoff run last year, maybe even this season, but now it's 2 years in a row where injuries are just going to completely derail them. They've gone from a team that had championship aspirations to now one that's just kind of stuck in basketball purgatory. They're in limbo for the next 3-4 months up until the NBA draft, up until Ja Morant can come back at the beginning of next season. It's really rough. A team that has so much potential feels like they could take a jump this year. It's all down the drain. But the more that I look at this, I do think there are some positives that could come out of it long term. The first one is now you've got just kind of a few months of the season to see what you have on this roster. They've got a lot of young talent that I feel like could play really well and be high-level role players for them, but they need to see what they can do. Now you can give expanded roles to like Vince Williams, who's been really good for you so far this season. Shout out to him, he just got a new contract. You could let like Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, Zaire Williams, guys like that, see what they could do, give them expanded roles, play them into different scenarios, see how they produce. Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane even, as two of your core pieces, see what they can do with expanded roles over the course of a full season. They've already kind of been doing it at the beginning of the year. See what else they can do. You know, give Desmond Bane like some point guard reps. I don't know, just get crazy, try stuff out to see what versatility you have on this roster going into next season and what moves you need to make, because in the offseason, they're likely going to have a top 5-6 pick in this draft. They have their own draft pick, which is great because now you can either add a top-end young talent if you want to, or a lot more interesting, they're going to have a top pick that they could potentially use in a trade to add another piece to this roster. As much as I like Ja, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson, it does feel like they still need like one final piece to this team, whether that's a wing player or a big. And the market's probably going to be pretty open this offseason. There's probably going to be a lot of options. Even if at the deadline you decide that, hey, we know our pick's going to be good, but we want to make an acquisition, you could do that there as well. I don't think you have to wait till the offseason to make a deal. So with that top pick, the fact that they've got like all their future draft picks, you've got big contracts like Marcus Smart's $20 million. Luke Kennard is making $15 million. Young players that you could potentially throw into a trade if you wanted to, like Zaire Williams, David Roddy, G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams, who probably they won't give up, but he's just another young name I want to throw in there. You've got some pieces that you could use to make a blockbuster deal and swing this core even further up towards the upper echelon of the Western Conference. Imagine they add another all-star caliber player or just a great supporting piece next to Ja, Bane, and Jaren Jackson going into next season where they can have a fresh start and build this thing from the bottom. I think it could lead to a really good Grizzlies team, the best one of this Ja Morant era next year. Some interesting names for the Grizzlies include include like a Mikal Bridges, I think he would be perfect for this team as that 3-and-D wing that they've been looking for. Gives you a lot more offensive potential than like a Dillon Brooks, while also still being able to lock up. I think he'd play really well off of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. He's now in there as your 4th option, which is a fantastic spot to have a guy of Mikal Bridges' talent in. I don't know if the Nets are looking to move off from him, but if the Grizzlies have like a top 5-ish pick, some young talent and contracts to match in the offseason, I think at the very least, the Nets are probably willing to listen to your offer. I like Lauri Markkanen a lot for this team too. If the Jazz are looking to add another top pick in this upcoming draft to kickstart their rebuild, I wouldn't be surprised if they listen to an offer. I think there are some great players out there the Grizzlies could add, and ultimately, this season, as bad as it seems now, as cursed as it's been over the past 12 months or so, this could be the stretch that gets the Grizzlies over the hump, gives them another asset to add that final piece alongside Ja and these other talented players that helps the Grizzlies eventually reach that championship that they've been looking for so long. So as much as this season might seem like an overall waste for the Grizzlies, I think there's still a lot to gain from it. The core is still young, so it's not like this is their last chance to win or anything like that. You go out into this offseason, make a big time move, or at the deadline, you develop your young guys and your stars over the course of the season, see what you have in this roster, test things out, and going into next season, you could have a really stacked team that could maybe go ahead and become a juggernaut in the Western Conference, a conference that right now is pretty wide open. So those are my thoughts on the Grizzlies. Let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are. Who should they target in a trade? Should they trade off a guy like a Marcus Smart or Luke Kennard to add some more assets? And how good do you think they could be next season if they do add a high-level piece? I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.